Okay, that's that. Okay, so I see a couple of extra people have just joined as well. We'll kick off with a little round of name and your organisation and where you're calling in from today. Claire, can I nip to you first?
Hi, I'm Claire and I'm from Scotland, based on the east coast of Scotland, and I'm director of Making Rights Real.
Brilliant. And then maybe Ciara, Sarah and Jim.
Hi everybody, my name's Ciara. I'm the coordinator of the All Ireland Endorsement Body for Community Work Education and Training, and I'm based on the west coast of Ireland, where the sun is splitting the rocks and it's about 24 degrees, which anyone who's been into the west of Ireland would know this is a fairly unusual scenario to encounter. Nice to meet you all.
I'm Sarah, and we're honoured to have your presence. I would be lying on the rocks myself, I think, for this rare occasion. In Durham, it's been quite cool. I'm in Durham, northeast England, and I work at Durham University.
I'm Jim Barnable. I'm from Cardiff. I've been involved in the movement for quite a long time, to be honest with you. And in fact, I met Anastasia on a visit, I think, to Wales some years ago, and Anna and a few others. I'm working on the development of Caritas, which is an international organisation you probably know, across the South Wales, so the two dioceses in South Wales, Cardiff and Menevia, where we're introducing the Caritas process itself so that we can actually engage people. And of course, the issues that we're talking about today are very much at the forefront of our minds.
Thanks, Jim. Malcolm Lee, Anastasia, Devet, would you like to introduce yourselves next?
I'm Anastasia Crickley. I'm from Ireland. I've been involved in community work most of my life. I used to run the Department of Applied Social Studies at Maynooth University. I'm also currently chair of Pavy Point Traveller and Roma Centre, and also of the Minority Rights Group International, which is why I'm in London, and a few other things, but I'd be afraid to tell everything to everybody all at once because it doesn't really help. And Jim, I hope to be in Wales sometime soon and to see you directly in person.
Get in touch.
Yeah.
Okay, Malcolm Lee.
Hello, I'm Malcolm. I'm a community worker in the Western Community Services in Malta. Here the sun shines quite a lot during all seasons. I'm currently also studying a master's in community action and development at the University of Malta, and looking forward for this seminar. It looks going to be very interesting.
Thank you. And Devet, and then Jim Robertson, then Mario.
From my side, I'm actually a fly against the wall. I'm not on your part of the world. I'm South African. I am the Skitter. I am in community development for most of my life, research and lecturing. And I'm actually interested in joining this conversation also today in the different nuances of community development on the different continents. The reason being my interest in community development theory. So that's from my side. Thank you.
Thank you. Jim, then Mario.
Sure.
Hello, Jim Robertson's my name. I'm a Scot, but I live in northeast England. And looking around the room, I think I've known 50% of the people since last century. So it's nice to be here. Thank you.
Hi, hello. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes. Yes.
Good
Hi.
to see you. Good to see you again.
Me too. Nice to be here. Good to see many familiar faces. I was missing these these groups. So I'm from Portugal. I'm Mario from Portugal, the city of Coimbra. I'm teaching and developing on social cultural animation. So very nice to see you all.
Great, thanks, Mario.
Thank you.
And that leaves Stuart, Colin, Maria, and Jessica.
I go first. I'm Stuart. I'm a voice like Jim from the past, and I'm still here and still very interested, and been working with some groups locally And I'm now a member of the Scottish Grant Making Trust, which is a forum that brings together all the grant making trusts in Scotland. So it's a role of trying to, I think, move from being a poacher, looking for most of my professional life for funding for projects, to being part of the trusts that are now giving money to projects, which is, it's very hard to do. It's very tough giving money away.
Well, you can always have a conversation with us, Stuart.
Yeah.
Nice to see you, Jim. Stuart.
And you, yeah.
Everybody's moved on my screen, so I can't remember what the
Colin.
order of that was. It Colin, and then Maria, and then Jessica.
And Sarah.
No, Sarah's done. Sarah's done.
Here.
Yeah, my name's Colin. I'm in Glasgow in Scotland. I'm another remnant from the last century, unfortunately, but yeah, I've been in the I've been involved in community development in one way or another for most of my life, I suppose, really. And I'm currently a trustee with IACD, and as Stuart was just saying, starting to get a bit more involved in things locally where I live as well.
Okay.
Nice to see you.
That would be me. Hi, everyone. My name's Maria. I'm speaking from Malta, where it's actually refreshingly cool for this time of the year. I'm an academic, and I'm also a practitioner and an activist, and I've been working with asylum seekers and refugees for the past 20 years in Malta.
Jessica, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi everyone. Jessica Sinclair, originally from the Netherlands. I'm IACD's administrative officer since November of last year. Very nice to meet you all.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, so then maybe that took a little bit longer in our schedule, but I think it's really helpful once we get into this sort of discussing things that we know who's who and people's backgrounds a little bit. I'm based in Northern Ireland. I've been working in community development work for 30-something years, and I work with Anastasia and Kira in the All Ireland Endorsement Body for community work, education and training. I work for an organisation here in Northern Ireland also called IACD, which works to support the care and resettlement of people who have been involved in the criminal justice system. And I also do some consultancy work with a community development focus as well. So great to have you all here. Just a couple of practical things before I hand over to Anastasia. This is something that we haven't done an awful lot of in terms of bringing together the European members through virtual meetings, but it is something that we hope to do increasingly so in from here on in. So it's great to have that connection, and hopefully that will strengthen and grow. Thank you for joining. I think we find ourselves in really challenging times at the moment, and the purpose of this session is a really clear evidence of that. And because of that, I think it's important that we do come back and revisit what we do with communities, which is encourage that connecting, the networking, the sharing and the knowledge exchange. And also support and show solidarity with each other as practitioners as well. So it's a big year for IACD too. You may have picked up from some of the mailings. This is our 70th year of being, and it's also our 25th year of being in Scotland. So we have a lot to be thankful for and a lot to think about moving forward, and look forward to your contributions towards that. So today's meeting has a very clear focus on working around, and there's Rob joining us as well, working around the support of people communities involving migrants, refugees and asylum seekers. And we have with us Anastasia Crickley, who introduced herself anyway, and who's going to share with us some of her experiences in terms of setting some context around that area of work on an international basis, as well as drawing on our own experiences of working at a national level and within local communities too. Rob, you are extremely welcome. Thank you for joining. Do you want to just briefly say who you are and where you're from, and then I'll hand over to Anastasia.
Thanks, Anna, and apologies for being late. I'm Rob Gregory. Nice to see some familiar faces. I'm Director for Housing and Communities at Stevenage Borough Council in England. But I'm kind of involved in various different things, previously on the board for IACD. So yeah, very happy to be here and reconnect with colleagues this afternoon.
Thanks, Rob. And I should say we're also going to hear more specifically from Maria as well, after Anastasia, in relation to Maria's work extensively over the last 20 years working with refugees in Malta. So Anastasia, over to you.
What I want to do really is to talk a little bit about how, in the context I'm in now, which is as chair of the Minority Rights Group International, and also in the Irish and global context in which I have worked, to speak just very briefly about some of what I see as the current key issues that we need to pick up on with regard to migration, and then talk a little bit to some of the work that I've been involved in and others have been involved in as well. So, I mean, the first thing I'd say is that globally, just right now, there's a big post-COVID movement. And this should have been expected much more clearly everywhere, because it was inevitable that there would be a post-COVID movement. People weren't able to move in the same way as they might have wanted to do during COVID. There's also an associated movement which has to do with the increasing implications, particularly, but not only in Africa, of climate, of climate disaster and of climate change. So all of these are leading to a situation which is usually referred to as mixed migration. And by mixed migration, I mean that sort of situation where one group of people are deemed in very traditional terms as the deserving refugees, and another group of people are deemed to be the undeserving migrant workers. And I'm suggesting to you quite honestly that the terminology and the thinking that underpins it is actually profoundly racist in a number of ways, and serves only to divide people. It is the case that countries have a right to decide who are citizens and who gets admission. But the use of that sort of terminology frequently means that people, when you move from one country to another, in one country you're deemed to have one sort of status, and when you move to another country, you're deemed to have another sort of status. The next thing I would say to you is that in an overall global context as well, the right to move and the right to migrate does need to be somewhat taken on board. And the best attempt we have to do that is the Global Compact on Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration, which was agreed by all of the countries of the United Nations in 2015, if I recall correctly, or maybe it was 2016. But in effect, while useful, of course, the countries refused to make that into a human rights treaty or into anything that could be totally binding on them. At least, though, it provides a framework for understanding the right to migrate. And people can migrate for, groups of people migrate for a whole variety of reasons, as we all know. But most frequently of late, they have to do with this sort of disasters and also to do with war, particularly in a European context. The second thing I wanted to say to you is that one of the global experiences of migrants has been excluded, and has also been whether, and I'm using the term migrants in the way that it's used to include both people who are migrant workers, people who are seeking international protection, and people who already have status, either leave to remain or refugee status. So I'm using the term migrant in the way that it's used globally to refer to people who fill, or to refer to all of those categories. But one of the global experiences of migration as well, which is one of exclusion, even where one is in a legal migrant status. And looking here at the British papers and at the British media over the last couple of days, I've been very interested to find that the Labour Party are now considering, for example, limited migration for a limited period of time, because you just need these skills for a while as the debate around AI moves ahead in a fairly rapid way, and some of these skills might actually be replaced, or some of the sort of work that people are doing might be replaced by robots which come through from artificial intelligence. So there are some very limited analysis and understandings, but a number of them rely on a post-colonial or a neo-colonial understanding that the countries at the core, and by those I mean all of our countries in the European context, that these are the ones that have a right to now, having inflicted ourselves on everyone else for as long as we possibly could, have a right now to bring in people from other parts of the world on our terms and on our terms only, and to basically treat them in what is a systemic racist fashion, which needs, I would suggest to you, in order to deal with it, a decolonization of our understanding of what we're about. As regards Europe, one of the big concerns at the moment has been the differential between people seeking asylum in Europe on one hand, and the treatment in a European Union context of refugees who have come from Ukraine. Because under the emergency directive of the European Union, which was invoked, although it has been in place for a considerable period of time, was invoked for the first time in April of this year, people who are refugees from Ukraine can be fast-tracked into other member states of the European Union and are not subject to the same conditions as people seeking international protection, receive allowances in all of the countries, and also have been guaranteed or allowed to work where they can find work. This has generated a fairly false division between people seeking international protection on one hand and Ukrainian refugees on the other hand. And to some extent, this has been repeated in communities where there was a big upsurge of support across Europe for Ukrainian refugees, and perhaps a continued absence of direct engagement. I wouldn't say it was an antipathy to others seeking international protection, but an absence of direct engagement with regard to others seeking international protection. What it tended to ignore as well was the diversity within the people from Ukraine seeking refuge. And for example, I'm personally particularly conscious of the way in which Roma refugees from Ukraine have been turned back at a number of borders and have been discriminated against in terms of the treatment that they have received when they have tried to invoke the temporary directive and to get refuge in the various member states of the European Union. Okay, the last thing I would say then before I move to a little bit about action is that there has also been some interesting considerations of the position of women as migrants, and a sort of a categorization of women migrants as vulnerable. And I feel that this has served no useful purpose except to create conditions of further marginalization of women migrants. Where you're asking, well, what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that the focus on women in the migration process is very often about our vulnerability, is very often about women as being trafficked or as being put into positions due to smuggling of forced labor. And in fact, sometimes there can be a bit of confusion between both smuggling and forced labor. But I'm suggesting that this raises questions about whether the concern is with our liberation as women on one hand, or progress for us or instrumentalization and further cementing of our positions as being somehow secondary. Reactions at the moment in a number of European countries reinforce this. And for example, concerns that have been expressed here in Ireland directly criminalize Black men in particular as being sort of potential rapists. And on the other hand, designate women of colour or who are not of a mottled pink colour, like a lot of us around this table at the moment, designate them as being sexually available. So those are fairly sort of widely used reinterpretations of people and perceptions of people in those sort of positions. So what sort of action has been happening then, and what can community work do, or what has community work done? I think this is a key question at the moment with regard to what constitutes community work, and also raises key challenges about the link between individual services on one hand and collective organisation of people on the other hand. I think a starting point has been to be very clear that as community workers, we need to talk about residents and the rights of residents, irrespective of their status, the rights of people who are in a place, irrespective of their status, to have a say with regard to the conditions that the way they're being treated and the conditions that they find themselves in. And I'm conscious of a lot of the work that's been done by organisations across Europe, which is particularly good at providing services, but is not directly involved in the collective organisation of migrants or of people who are in direct provision or of people. So that instead of organising the people who are in the camps or in what we call direct provision in Ireland, instead of organising them to help them to seek better conditions for themselves, we have moved right back into advocating or speaking on their behalf with their authorities while providing services for them. Exceptions to this in the work that I've been involved in have been, for example, the Migrants' Rights Centre Ireland, which over a number of years has sought to bring together migrant workers in this instance, mostly, a number of whom would have been undocumented. So for example, for 10 years, there has been a campaign for regularization, because if you use the term amnesty, you get nowhere. And I think what work in this field certainly shows me is that we need to mind our language. We need to be careful about the language we use. So after a 10-year campaign led by a group which was formed as part of a community work group by some community workers working with the Migrants' Rights Centre. After 10 years of a campaign led by migrant workers themselves, supported by community workers, that regularisation process has now involved 10,000 people getting their status regularised. Some of them are here into the second generation. Some of them have been here for a considerable period of time. And there are, of course, a number of others as well. A second piece of work that we were involved in there was work with mushroom pickers, which I was conscious of it, Stuart, when you were talking there, nearly lost us one of our funders whose company apparently, whose company was in a big way involved in mushroom farms, as well as a variety of other things, and certainly didn't like our organising of the mushroom workers to demand key pay and conditions for themselves. A third piece of work has involved working with migrant workers with migrants to actually focus not so much on pay and conditions, which is more correctly a job of the unions, but to focus on the living conditions that are associated with the migration process, to focus on the fact that, for example, during COVID, migrant workers were frequently blamed for spreading COVID, but they were very often living in houses provided by employers when they were working in meat factories and a variety of other things of that nature, which meant that they didn't have any option in terms of either their accommodation or their transport to and from work. And of course, they were in contact with people. If one of them got COVID, that meant that. So, okay, so that's where, and my last few thoughts then are going to be more generally about work in local communities. What we've been trying to struggle with here is the idea that it's easy to talk about the work I've been talking about because that's been undertaken by the Migrants' Rights Centre, by the Immigrant Council, by some of us involved in groups that are targeted to do work with migrant workers. But what I think is more challenging for us all as community workers is what constitutes community in any of the geographical areas in which we're living at this point in time or working at this point in time. And the reality that in order to, any of the communities that you're involved in or that we're living in have a variety of people engaged in them or living there. And a number of them will be people who are not from the area, who are migrants, who have different status, and who are frequently not in any way included in the community activities. Or if they are included, they're asked to integrate with what is going on. And I think this fails dismally, and I think we're all failing dismally in this regard, to capture the real picture, which is about people having a right to have a say collectively and individually about what's happening for them, and having a right to have a say about how they organise to seek that as well. So it's not just having a right to organise them to have a say, but it's also about people having a right to have a say about how they organise themselves. I think this is I have found to be quite challenging for local community projects. And what I have seen happen in this arena is very much more a reversal into service provision. So what needs to happen here is that people need language services, they need various other things. That's all very true. But in our own work on an ongoing basis, our role would be normally to use those as a jumping off ground to create conditions for people to be involved or to think way outside the box and do a variety of other things. I think we need to try to get that far. So those are my few thoughts just for now.
Thank you very much, Anastasia. Very, very comprehensive and also very stimulating in terms of the topics that we're exploring here this afternoon. Stimulating in the context of its complexity, I think, in many respects, and that understanding only comes with the experience of working around those issues and directly with people. So thank you for that, and we will come back and revisit some of your points. But I think what we'll do is we'll hear from Maria as well, and then we'll go into the breakout rooms and give people the opportunity to sort of explore a little bit more from both contributions. So Maria, I will hand over to you.
And can you see my slides?
Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Hello, everybody. And Anastasia, thank you very much. It made my presentation a lot easier as well, because there's an awful lot of overlap. When Claire asked me to speak, I was telling her a few minutes ago, it's always interesting because it gives me an opportunity to reflect a little bit on what's happening here as well. And often when you're working in the field, you don't stop to reflect. So it's always interesting for me as well. There's a lot of overlap. As I'm listening to Anastasia, I recognize almost all of it. But I think at the same time, it's not a but, it's an and. There are also particularities with every context. And in the Maltese context, well, with the smallest EU member state, we're tiny. Today we have a population of around 500,000 people, but I'll get to that. We form part of the external border. We're, I believe, closer to Tripoli than Tripoli is to Benghazi, just to give you an idea geographically. And if I was to speak to you in Maltese, and if you could speak Arabic, there's a good chance you'd understand me. The boats started crossing from North Africa in the late 1990s. So this is nothing new. It's been going on for 2 decades, more than 2 decades now, which renders any notion of crisis and being taken by surprise as ridiculous. We can be absolutely sure that boats will be crossing the Mediterranean every year. And at the same time, we can be absolutely sure that every effort will be made under the present circumstances to stop them from coming. 2002 was when the boats started coming a little bit quicker. So we're looking at 2 decades, but in those 2 decades, we've seen evolving patterns as well. For example, people leaving from Tunisia, people leaving from Egypt, not only from Libya, predominantly, not exclusively, but predominantly young men, many of them under the age of 18, minors, and in their 20s and early 30s. And of course, their experience is gendered too then. I found Anastasia's conversations around vulnerability particularly interesting. If I use the term gender, people, especially in humanitarian work, people automatically assume I'm speaking about women, and this is automatically intersected with vulnerability. And if we're speaking about young men, they're assumed to be almost aggressive, resilient, strong. And of course, there's vulnerabilities there. So vulnerability is a complex concept in its own right. Malta is going through some interesting transitions. So we joined the EU in 2004, so that more or less coincided with the arrival of asylum seekers. But in the last 10 years, we adopted an economic policy based on immigration. And our population in the last 10 years, and let me, because it was so rapid, in the 5 years prior to COVID, the population grew by 25%. And that was essentially economic migration. Now, that's a problematic term in its own right, but people who have been asked to come to Malta and essentially help us grow the economy. Now, I'm going to define that as neoliberal cosmopolitanism. So in the period of 20 years, we've gone from a largely homogeneous population to a multi-ethnic, very diverse population. But of course, the experiences of the different migrants is much more complex than that. So rapid social, cultural, economic, demographic, and environmental change over the last 20 years, particularly over the last 10 years. And this has coincided with a convenient scapegoating, more specifically of Black illegalized asylum seekers, racialized asylum seekers that are crossing the Mediterranean. I started working in the field in 2004. So more or less at the beginning, I was running the first open center in Malta, which was a state-run open center in the south of the island. I realized very, very quickly that I wasn't able to speak publicly about the conditions that people were being held in. So I resigned and set up an NGO, Integra Foundation, which was the first NGO set up specifically to work on these issues. There were other NGOs already working here, JRS Malta, still very, very active in the field. And the Migrants Commission, which was actually the Emigrants Commission, which is a church organization that was set up paradoxically to support Maltese emigrants over the last 100 years. After the Second World War, Malta had the highest percentage of emigration any country had ever experienced up until that point as a direct result of poverty. And again, it was largely our young men that left in search of hope elsewhere. So working in a micro context like Malta offers its own challenges and also opportunities. My work is focused on advocacy, and I work closely with other NGOs, lawyers, human rights NGOs, migrant and refugee-led NGOs, and others, particularly more recently, more culturally based NGOs. I've decided more recently to take a step back from the community work, the sort of grassroots work, and focus more on research, because we realized that we need an evidence base to support our advocacy. After 20 years, we realized we didn't have much documented evidence. We were too focused on our advocacy without documenting what was going on. And then there is the community work. As Integra, we have a drop-in, a community center where initially it was young men used to come, a place to hang out, learn English and Maltese. We support them with CVs, CV writing, just making friends. And interestingly, more recently, we have a number of Ukrainians also using the same service. And in Malta, they're predominantly women, generally of quite a high level of education, many of them with children. So today in our classes, we have young men from Africa and slightly older women from Ukraine learning English and sometimes Maltese together. So if I was to look at policy specifically related to asylum seekers in Malta, they are automatically detained. It used to be for sometimes many years. Then it was dropped to 18 months. At the moment, people are being detained for months on end, and this includes unaccompanied minors. It is a context that is marked by limited access to rights. The majority, at the moment, very few people are being granted protection. And those that are granted protection are given subsidiary protection. And in Malta, if you're granted subsidiary protection, you have no right to access citizenship later on. So what we're seeing of those people that have remained in Malta is a growing number of people. Some of them have been here 20 years and their children with no route to citizenship. I've blocked my words. Okay. What we've also seen about 5 years ago as a result of our, I think it was a bit more than that actually, as a result of our advocacy, there was a program that was introduced to regularize rejected asylum seekers that couldn't get back home. We welcomed that policy as an opportunity to begin including people that had otherwise been excluded on every level. More recently, though, they've removed some of these rights, which has made it almost impossible for some of them to maintain that level of stability. It has had an impact on the whole population, regardless of their status, because it's introduced a new sense of insecurity. You gave me protection, you can also take that protection away. So this has been incredibly problematic for those people that are experiencing it, first and foremost, and also in terms of our work on the ground and advocacy. I'll get to that in a second. For many people that reach Malta, it was not their intention. They just are trying to reach Europe. So they try and leave Malta with this goal of reaching Italy or Sweden or the UK or France, often depending on where they were coming from in the first place. So you also have this rapid sort of turnover of people leaving and then being sent back because of the Dublin. It adds to, well, it doesn't exactly do work in favor of inclusion. Sometimes people give up and they say, okay, I'm going to stay here and try to make the most of it. It all adds to this ongoing sense of precarity. It is a context marked by racial profiling, particularly in policing. And when you're living in such a small context where the national is the local and the local is the national, it's difficult to speak publicly. You really are exposing yourself on the national platform. And I'll remind you that asylum seekers, regardless of their status, apart from those few that are granted refugee status, but even for them, it's very problematic. It's almost impossible to get citizenship. So they don't have a vote. And so their voices, there is the question of, can they speak? And even if they can speak, will they be heard? And more often than not, they're not prepared to speak on the national platform because they're scared. which offers its own challenges for us as activists in terms of when to speak, what to say, and the risk always of recolonizing their voices. But it has been 20 years. I included an image here of the Black Lives Matters protests, which for us was really interesting. This was in the middle of the pandemic. We weren't going to do anything. We organized this in my living room, and mainly because there was so much demand for us to do something. It was by far the most successful protest we've ever organized over 20 years. And for me, it never happened again. You know, that sort of wave of Black Lives Matters moved on. And when we organized protests since then to raise awareness, we never had the same kind of turnout. But it was incredibly interesting to see the turnout of young people, young Maltese people, and young migrants from all around the world standing together, demanding change together. And it struck me then that it's been 20 years since we started working on this. And whilst we were getting on and doing our work, Malta was changing too, and so were the young people. They were new young people, and for them, there was nothing scary or particularly shocking about a boat arriving. They were going to school with them. Their parents may not be familiar with asylum seekers and refugees, or even people of color, but they are. They've always been there. So today we're looking at a different picture, one that's marked by immigration from around the world. You can look at Malta as a super diverse context, but within that context, there are interesting intersectionalities. More recently, we saw the launch of the anti-racism strategy, and we're pushing for representation there. I thought I'd tell you a little bit about the policy work that we're doing. And we have representation from migrants that are coming from Europe, but migrants of color. So this has been quite interesting. We also work on the integration strategy, but that's essentially dead in the water. We're looking to see where this is heading over the next few years. Much of the state work has focused on social work intervention, but there's been very little focus on community work and community engagement. Our focus has almost always been on asylum policy, and despite everything that I said about Black Lives Matters and changing perspectives, what we also see, I think, is compassion fatigue. People just don't respond. A boat of people drown in the Mediterranean, and it doesn't even make headlines anymore. Often it's the result of our own government engaged in illegal pushbacks, and no one bats an eyelid. We've worked on just building relationships, but like I said, these relationships are happening organically anyway. And I think there's a lot more work that needs to be done in terms of community engagement beyond the refugee-led and refugee NGOs in general. But we are seeing more refugee-led organizations working with us. And of course, other important spaces is we've seen a lot in terms of the arts and in certain terms of the culture, sort of dance groups, especially I would say, and theatre groups that are also engaging on inclusion issues and also developing community relations there as well. But I think there's a lot more that needs to be done. But I am optimistic. Hope is a political act, and I sort of live in hope that the younger generation are taking on a different reality with different perspectives, fresher perspectives, and new ways of working that we need to learn from them as well, I think. And sometimes I think our approaches are tired and perhaps a little jaded. And I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Maria. And again, really interesting to hear your experiences from Malta and the specifics and the nuances associated with that as well. And again, just speaks to the entire complexity of all of this. When you put the smallest state in Europe into the mix and the context that that brings to the situation as well. A lot of things that I jotted down there that I'd quite happily start to talk about, but I think the best thing to do is to give everyone that chance and go into smaller groups.
Michael, I'm from Switzerland. I guess I'm the only Swiss member. What's there to say about me? I'm not involved in community development, but I'm involved in community development education.
Okay.
We run EU-funded programs for youth workers where we do self-development and community development, the different courses, and that's kind of the uniqueness of what I do is combining self-development through biography work with community development. We call it social design.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you very much, Michael. You're
Hello.
very welcome. Hello, how are you? Good to
I'm
see
sorry
you.
for being so late, but I decided I still want to show my face anyway.
Well, thank you, and it's lovely to see you. And while we're on the business of catch-up introductions, Anna, you're also very welcome. I know you joined a little bit later and we've got through some of the intros at that point, but would you like to say anything by way of an introduction?
Yeah, hello.
Hi.
Well, today is actually, as I said in the breakout room, I apologize because I'm not in the most appropriate surrounding, but actually it's a holiday in Croatia, so we took a chance to get out to the sea a little bit, and but I didn't want an opportunity to join the meeting. So yeah, my name is Anna Opačić. I'm from Croatia, also working at the Department for Social Work, teaching community development, but also doing more in field of social planning and community projects. So yeah, happy to be here with you today.
Wonderful, thank you. And thanks for joining and taking the time to do that on a holiday when the sun is shining and you're doing other things
Yeah,
as
this
well.
is a bit of a sea around me.
Oh, gorgeous.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
You're making some of us very jealous, Anna.
Yeah.
I apologize.
Okay, well, thanks everybody. I think we'll get a little bit of feedback. I hope we got some notes taken in the Google form, and Anastasia's not back yet to do a bit of a plenary. So anyway, I tell you what, we'll just do a little bit of a, not group by group, but sort of general reflections from the discussions, and we'll take that from anyone for about 10 minutes or so, and then sort of decide where we're going to go from there. So
I was in Claire's group and I took the notes and I didn't submit them.
Okay.
So they are still in front of me at the moment. So if I can maybe summarize just a little what we've said.
Perfect.
Basically, we were lucky that we had quite some different contexts, so we could maybe compare a little and find some things that are different. So the first thing that was identified is the context. So the differences, not just in the countries, but even in the regions, affects greatly community development and also the way we address these issues. Most of the times we say that the only constant in communities change, and we have seen many different a rapid social change, and Maria was talking about this with regards to Malta. Just to give an example, the church, which held so much power and prevented many rights in reality to advance, and in about 20 years or less, its power diminished greatly. New laws which were never thought of has passed through, and it's brought a different reality that maybe the community wasn't yet ready for that social change. There was also a very interesting comment that the United Kingdom is not unified politically, socially, and culturally. One very interesting point mentioned was the unconditional income that is found in Wales, which, as it suggests, it's unconditional, so it really supports the cause, and maybe this could be something moving forward with regards to migration. Also, one of the best ways to tackle this issue is through legal procedures. So at the moment, it was found that it's one of the most successful routes in advocating for the rights of migrants, and maybe adopting a human rights-based community development approach and keeping human rights as the basis for community development practice. So that, in a nutshell, I hope I did justice to the rich discussion that was being done in our group.
Okay, thank you very much, Malcolm. Well, we'll maybe just, seeing as there's only 2 other groups, get a little bit of a reflection from someone in each of the other 2, and then open that out a little bit further. Obviously, Malcolm and Maria were in the same group, I take it. Did you put your hand up there, Stuart?
Well, if you want, I can try and recall. You can pull me up if I get it wrong. But there's a lot of similarity, I think, in the discussion. And it was very clear that the context is everything. But, we had examples from South Africa. I think the comment made was the borders of South Africa are porous. So people have always moved across them or moved back into other parts of Africa. And that led to a discussion about whether, when you're intervening with asylum seekers or migrants, you are working in a community development way, as we might otherwise have understood it, or is it, I don't want to misquote you, but I think it was being suggested that it was more of a charitable intervention in camps rather than community development. And that led to a discussion about those who are in camps for a long time. It has to be a community development response, as opposed to those who are moving through camps on their way to other parts of the world, if you like. So, or back to where they came from. So context with everything, but the common theme in our discussion was wherever you were working, we wanted, as Anastasia, I think, first said, and as Maria also highlighted, we wanted to hear the voice of those we were working with. And we need to be very sensitive to that rather than speak for them or create structures where there's public sector interventions that make assumptions about their needs. And then we got into some examples, practical examples, which tended to be NGO-led or voluntary sector-led, of things like community cafes or church-based arts responses, or creating the space for migrants and asylum seekers to be together and to find association with others and expression and perhaps some humanity in the way that the host community accepts them. So that's a summary. And you might want to add, you were in the group as well, to things that came up, I don't know.
Well, I think that was a fairly good summary. So if we hear from the third group then, and then, any final reflections that folk want to share from those conversations. So who was in that other group? Sarah.
I volunteered to start it off, but actually others have got a lot of useful things to say. But I think it's some similar comments to the earlier group, that it's very difficult to do a community development approach when you're dealing with individuals who've just arrived and also people who may be dispersed and move on. And Rob had some quite interesting examples, I think, about the need for agility, flexibility for community workers to take on roles that weren't really apparently community development roles, but might be. Rob, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, and I guess it kind of came out as we were kind of reflecting in the conversation that whilst, community development workers were often moving into that space of dealing with very basic welfare needs, medical issues, food, other things, actually, and that isn't the bread and butter of community development, but it was an opportunity to create conversations and build trust and start building relationships and recognizing that's so important. So that agility of community development, to be able to respond in that circumstance, there's a very real need, but actually it creates a good space to start some of that dialogue and that conversation and start to build the trust. And the reflection that this is moving community workers into quite a different space, and need to be quite agile, quite nimble, with approach is quite key. And I guess we also ended with, we've lost a lot of pure community development officers, workers across much of the UK. What does that mean in terms of other organisations that might be, in some of that welfare space, and how do we kind of skill up or develop those community development skills within others to, start to build some of those foundations of community work practice? So there was quite a bit of a reflection on that within our group.
Okay, thank you. Here's Anastasia back. So we've really given her a let off, haven't we? We've done all of that plenary. Anybody got any other comments or reflections from those discussions? And thank you, Rob, for your contribution there from your group. Hello, Anastasia. We've just had feedback from the 3 groups. Perfect timing. But I have just asked if there's anybody got any other reflections or observations on the conversations at all, particularly since we've heard from all 3. Jim.
I didn't say. Oh, sorry, Jim.
No,
do you want to say
2
something, Jim?
Jims. Well, I saw Jim Barneville there. I didn't see Jim Robertson.
Jim and I know each other very well.
Mario, yeah. So we'll go Jim, Mario.
I didn't mention it in the breakout. What I was thinking was in 2015, I went with 7 others from the different faith groups to a meeting in the Home Office to try and persuade the government to take on a scheme that had been going on in Canada for 25 years, I think. What ultimately they agreed something, and it was a community sponsorship scheme. Now, it was a very useful scheme because it actually didn't sort of lay the work on the authority. What it did was it was built useful relationships with different people from the local community who would receive Syrian refugees at that time. And it was very successful in the sense that it actually helped a whole range of people come together and work in an effective way with the Syrian refugees. Unfortunately, when we had a number of other, as it were, immigrants coming in, refugees coming in, Afghanistan, Hong Kong, and things like that, we weren't using the same scheme. It seemed the government didn't understand the basis of it is actually to engage in community and actually help community themselves to be involved in that development, in the processes and things like that. And so we have this mixed message going on about how on earth we should engage with people who are struggling individually or in families or whatever. Which hasn't been very helpful at all in a way in which we would address this sort of issue. But I do think that there was a lot to learn from the Canadian scheme, and in fact, our recent experience in the UK has been quite good on that. And I think it's important for the voluntary sector, from the civil society, to actually, really push the fact that we should be involved in the process. That really helps build community as well. It builds community development processes and practices, and it just enables almost an experiential learning process to be going on. That really obviously helps us not only now, but for the future. And I think it's quite important for us to value the community development processes that we use to engage people in actually understanding how it all works.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Jim Robertson, and then Mario, and then I might hand over to Maria and Anastasia for some final contributions.
Apologise for repeating a little bit from the small group, but it just as far as I see the context in England, and partly in Scotland, but mainly in England, is that in 50 years' time, if somebody's researching what is actually happening socially and contextually in this part of the world, then all of us have been part of the process of the privatization of public services. So I mean, if we take housing, effectively just about privatized now. If we take health type things, well on the way to privatization, If we take social care, then 84% of care of older people is in private hands now. And I learned the other day, and I didn't realize it was as bad as this, that young people as well, care homes for young people is also over 80% privately owned. So in a sense, community development is trying to, to find its way into that very, very neoliberal kind of context. And I think this is extremely challenging. I think if there are one or two glimpses of interesting things, it might be a little bit, which started north of the border in Scotland, of the Poverty Truth Commissions, which adopted a kind of community development oriented way of talking about things in terms of local people, and commissioners from the local community, even to change the language. Self-reliant groups, SRGs as they call it, is another issue that takes social enterprises to a different level, very much involving local people. And there's obviously things like community wealth building and the changing of the kind of values in these localities that are there. So it's difficult to feel like community development are involved in these, but some people are. But these are just glimpses for me of positive things looking forward, and how we can engage with them, I think is quite important. But community wealth building is perhaps the big one to look at. CLES as the main organisations.
Okay, thanks, Jim. I'm conscious of time now, so we'll take Mario. I know you had your hand up, and then Maria,
yes, but
and then Anastasia.
Yeah, I will pass directly to Anastasia. Some of my comments are already were already said here, whatever by Jim's both. Oh, okay, thank you, Anna.
Okay, thanks, Mario. Maria, I mean, really appreciate your joining us today and contributing. Any thoughts or reflections from you in terms of how the discussion has gone?
I mean, I think it's always so rich to listen to, enriching to listen to other people speaking from different contexts. It sort of clarifies how your own context is different, and at the same time helps to see the broader perspective and learn from other contexts as well. Perhaps in terms of community engagement and community work, I think what has really, the issue of time has been playing on my mind a lot recently. I mean, I keep saying 2 decades. Time also needs to do its thing. That's something that I've learned the hard way in Malta. And also that the kind of community work that we do is often, it depends on how long asylum seekers and refugees have been living in the country, and in our case, the country. Because their needs evolve over time as well. So at the beginning, it's much more in terms of practical needs, a roof over their head, putting them in contact with different places to work, to find somewhere to live. And it's only over time that they're able to focus on more strategic needs, where they start to feel at least a little bit more safe within a community and have that time and energy to look at what's going on outside of their immediate needs as well. So time is a really, I mean, obviously you have those individual differences, but I think time is an important one to keep in mind in terms of how it shapes the kind of work that we do.
Okay, thank you. And I think that's a really valuable message to recall there, that when we talk about different contexts, time is one of those contexts in this field of work, this area of work, which might not necessarily be a factor when we're working with a community that's, you know, a local community that's been there for decades, centuries perhaps, and you know, that doesn't have the same significance. So thank you. Anastasia, welcome back. You have a bit of a hard task here. So I wouldn't worry too much. You're on mute as well. I wouldn't worry too much about trying to draw out key themes, but maybe in the last few points since you joined us back,
could I just say a couple of things? I mean, what strikes me just from the bit I've heard is that while contexts are unique to the situation, there are also a number of things that are universal, you know, and I think rights and collective organizing are part of those, you know. So I think we need to sort of maybe look a little bit to what's universal but what is contextual, because, for example, Maria, you've been rightly saying about the Maltese context, the politics of Malta, the size of Malta, and the geographical situation of Malta. Second thing that strikes me is that I am familiar, Jim, with the community sponsorship program, and I think it can actually be quite useful. But at the moment, we need also to be careful that about the power relationships that can exist in those schemes between the people who get inflicted by the local sponsoring groups on one hand, and what they need or what they feel their interests are best served with on the other hand. But it is a very interesting initiative, and it has been used in a number of countries also for Afghan refugees, including here in Ireland. Thirdly, I feel that the question of addressing systemic barriers to inclusion, and sometimes I feel the term inclusion is useful to use, because the way we use integration, we're very often using it really to mean assimilation, or at best accommodation. If you want to talk about assimilation, accommodation, and then integration, we're really talking about at best an accommodation, bringing them in. And I think inclusion for me infers a much broader concept. And could I suggest as well that in addressing some of the systemic questions, I think maybe in our role as funders, and I'm conscious, Stuart, you're now on the board of foundations, and some of us end up in these sort of roles occasionally, it's worth looking at whether or not who are we saying constitutes the community, you know, in any situation, and who are we, and where are we looking at issues like racism and discrimination in way back, not just at the stage when the unfortunate project is reporting for its evaluation, but at the stage where decisions are getting made and where the criteria under which things might be funded are getting drawn up in the first place. I think sometimes we need to be a bit more courageous maybe in that move from needs to interests, because I think there is a journey there, but sometimes people are traversing the two journeys at the same time. Even some of the people in this country who have been on the side of the road with getting burnt out of their tents on the side of the road in Dublin over the last week or two have also been part of the movement of asylum seekers in Ireland and are also taking a stand. So I think there's a question of power, you know, and how we handle our power in these sorts of situations in order to create conditions where other people, and I'm a bit slow these days to use the term empower, where other people can actually demonstrate their power, you know, and begin to use it. You're absolutely right, Maria, that people won't want to do that very publicly, for sure, in the situations that they find themselves in. But sometimes, in my experience, that doesn't mean they don't have a view and they're not able to organize themselves, because as we both know, the fact that they got themselves to this side of the world in a number of instances in the first place means that they had a number of skills and capacities that most of us couldn't even think of. And I think that's probably a useful starting point to round this off, to say that I found the discussion very interesting and that I'm really sorry I couldn't be there. And I think that question also of community engagement and what the state means, this is to go to you, Jim Robertson, what the state means when it's talking about community engagement very often does mean replacing the services the state should be providing. And it's not really a focus on community development or community work that's involved. What they're really thinking about is a focus on replacing. So I think language is also becoming increasingly important, and the need to be quite focused and clear about what we're calling what in these. But thank you very much. And I think this is a discussion that could go on, and my apologies that I had to go and sort out, actually, as well as those accounts, Jim, you'll be glad to hear, a community sponsored program, which I'm not sure I managed to sort out, but thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Anastasia and Maria, for your inputs today, and also for your summing up there, and still posing challenges, which I think is really valuable, because there's nothing, there aren't any laurels to be sitting around on at this point in time, and we need to continue to grapple with those challenges in our practice and for the communities that we're working with. Which brings me to what we would like to do, as we're kind of behind the times with our colleagues in other regions around the world who've been meeting on a monthly basis for the last 3 years, is institute a more regular frequency of meetings for our European members. Perhaps 3 to 4 times a year. Maybe some of the things that have come out of this discussion would be, you know, appropriate and of value for us to pick up at some point at a meeting in the autumn. So I'd be interested to know if that's you know, something you'd appreciate, and if you have any thoughts on you know, a focus or a theme around that. Just by way of closing up, a couple of announcements since I have you here. Thank you all of you for joining, and for obviously your continued support of IACD. As you will know from the e-bulletins that Jessica has been circulating, this is a really big year for IACD, 70th anniversary and 25th year of being based in Scotland. So there's a lot for us to kind of reflect on, but there's an awful lot more for us to think about in terms of where the organisation goes, and where we want to take it, and drawing on the skills and the strengths of its members as well, and of being relevant and of value to our members. So we are next year, we will be developing a new strategy, a new 4-year strategy for 24 to 2028. That will involve us engaging specifically around that, around these themes. What is important? What are the key priorities for us? How can an organisation like IACD, which is small, work meaningfully to support practitioners on these areas of practice? And how would you like to be more involved with the organisation? So we'll be posing, I suppose, quite a lot of questions over the next while, and want to have a lot more discussion, and connect and network our members regionally as well as internationally. So do share with us your thoughts, your ideas, if you've got areas of practice that you're developing. The e-bulletin is a great way for us to share what you're doing internationally. And it's just, you know, 100 words and a link, and it gets that out there. But also communicate with us, you know, share your thoughts and ideas, email, all the different socials that we're now available on, including a revamped LinkedIn account. So there's plenty of ways to connect. And whilst I appreciate that you won't all be able to make it to Darwin in a couple of weeks' time, I think there's going to be some really fascinating, insightful and very interesting outworkings from all of those presentations, inputs, workshops and practice exchanges that we're also going to be really keen to share. So look out for that as well. Claire's got her hand up, so I'm going to finish. I'll hand to Claire, other than to say we've put another link into the chat, which is an evaluation for this session, and really appreciate if you just take a few minutes. There's, I think, 2 questions. Be done before you turn the laptop off. So if you wouldn't mind just giving us some thoughts around that as well, that would be really helpful. And thank you from me, and lovely to see you all, especially everybody who's got sunshine outside and you've stuck the afternoon with us inside. Thank you very much. Claire, over to you.
Thanks, Anna. Just to say that we're hoping to have the next European members meeting in person in Scotland on the 26th of September at a reception at the Scottish Parliament. So we will be sending out information about that as soon as we've got all our organisational stuff in place, but that's really an opportunity for us as the European members of IACD to also thank the Scottish Government for their continued support of IACD. So we'll be sending out information about that pretty soon. So do plan a trip to Scotland again. If you were here for Dundee, there might be more shenanigans like that. Stuart, I can see you smiling. So you're more than welcome to come, hopefully the 26th of September, and we'll find out info about that. But thanks everybody for being here. It's brilliant to be connected to everyone.
And I've just put a note in there about the date of the AGM as well. That will be a virtual gathering in July, and there will be more notice come out about that as well. Thanks everyone. Have a great afternoon or evening. Take care and we'll see you soon. Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye all. Take care. God bless.
Bye. Ciao.
Bye, Mario. Take care.